here.
Yes, it is always important to point out that our subject, unfortunately, is triggering. It's hard to deal with, it's hard to cope with and to hear. But one of our aims, one of our goals is to have the world become aware that sexual violence is part of conflicts in many, many places, and it was part of the conflict. It was used by Hamas as a weapon of war during October 7 and later on in captivity. Now, what we heard from hostages is from the hostages that had previously returned in the previous deals, obviously not from those who returned just recently, thank goodness, 3 days ago. And we heard very gradually and slowly, because we have to realize that those who come back from captivity have endured such a trauma, and it is taking very, very long time to process and to be able to share. And we don't know, we can expect more stories to come out. It's also important to understand that it is not only the women who return from captivity, it is also the men. Sometimes, and we know that from other conflict areas, as much as it is difficult for women survivors to share their stories, it is even more difficult for male survivors. But the aim of using sexual violence as a tool of war is, just like you pointed before, is to inflict the hardest form of terror and to harm the enemy in that area which is the most significant for proliferation, for procreation, for continuity. So it is to erase completely the sexuality and the procreative capacities of the enemy. And that is why the bodies, mostly of women, but also of men, are used in this form of terror.
And showed signs of that sort of violence. What sort of international response is then required? Because this will no doubt, hopefully, inform future responses to conflicts which, as you say, in other parts of the world do see sexual violence used as a weapon.
We were, I could say, maybe pleasantly surprised by the acceptance of international media when we came out with the report in July. And in August of recently, just 2025, the Secretary General of the United Nations actually included Hamas in the blacklist of those entities who use sexual violence as a weapon of war. And this is really opening the stage for further actions against Hamas, but obviously not just against Hamas. Part of our aim in this book was also to provide an overall legal framework, both evidentiary and substantive legal framework, to allow for prosecution of these crimes against humanity in the form of weaponization of rape and of sexual violence. We see the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which actually, according to its statute, the Rome Statute, rape in war and other forms of sexual violence are crimes against humanity, but very, very few indictments and even fewer convictions, because there is always challenges. It's difficult to prove the usual connection between the perpetrator and the victim when it happens as part of a war, when it's part of a battlefield. So the legal world must adapt. And what we call for is to use a theory of joint responsibility, that all those who entered such an attack against civilian population, aiming at the total destruction, dehumanization of the enemy, the genocidal intent, then they should all be held responsible for everything that happened during that attack.
I just want to take you back briefly to something you said at the beginning of that last answer, which was that you were, and you used the word sort of carefully, pleasantly surprised by the reaction to this report. What were you expecting? Because obviously you have the evidence. How important was the evidence, not just to be able to say, look, we've got this testimony, but we can actually prove it?
Well, we had been facing such a denialism campaign that started immediately on October 7. The it's not just Hamas, it's Hamas allies, which we know had began this new battlefield on the media, on social media, providing fake and trying to refute and to deny that October 7th actually happened, and mostly to deny the sexual violence. It had become the most controversial issue because by proving that they actually, just like ISIS and like Boko Haram, used rape and sexual violence as a weapon of war, that really rips the mask off, the facade of resistance fighters and freedom fighters. They are rapists. And unfortunately, a lot of international media went on with this denialism campaign. And that is why it was so important for us to come as independent experts, using our academic tools, our legal tools, and to provide such an evidentiary framework that leaves no doubt. And thankfully, it was also adopted by the United Nations, by the Secretary General.
Professor Ruth Halperin-Kaddari, founder of the Dinah Project based at the Bar Ilan University in Israel. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much for having me.